Professor Peter Baofu, welcome to Thahameso this morning.
Thank you.
Now, most African countries have been aided by China and America is lately renouncing bit by bit. How will this impact the continent?
It does impact in different ways. As I said in my book, not just one, several of them, the Chinese way of development now is very different from the European ways of development in the past. You have the colonial history and all that. The new way of development that China is proposing is also related to what I call post-democracy and post-capitalism. Post-democracy is the notion that democracy will not last. It will be replaced by different political systems. Post-capitalism is also the idea that capitalism will not last. It will be replaced by different economic systems, and there are different versions. And the Chinese version is contributing to that direction. India, by the way, is the next. But I propose more than many different versions. But there's, again, no single version which is universal, again, the same pattern.
What seems to be the stumbling block in Africa's growth?
There are many, I say a lot of good things, but also say a lot of bad things. Again, they can be classified in terms of the four categories that I just mentioned: cultural problems, social problem, natural problem, and mental problems. So there are four categories of reason, but there's no one single reason that you can point out and say, that is the problem. If we fix that problem, then the entire problem will disappear. It doesn't work like that. A good example is corruption. In the Western world, because of the ideology, they focus too much on the question of corruption in Africa. But I think that many issues in Africa is not about corruption. Corruption is only one thing, but there are many other things in terms of the four categories that I just mentioned. By the way, this is the negative side. On the positive side, you also have a lot of opportunities. There are a lot of good things about Africa, which is very important. In a way, Africa is not poor. Africa is very rich. And also in terms of the four categories that I just mentioned, the cultural richness, the social richness, the natural richness, and the mental richness. And that's why in my book on post-capitalism, I said there's no wealth without poverty, and there's no poverty without wealth. That means that if you have wealth in America, they also have a lot of poverty in some other ways. But if you have poverty in Africa, they also have a lot of wealth in some other ways too. But that is the diversity of the system itself.
You said Africa is rich, but most of their mineral resources are not extracted by them. Why?
Oh, well, you can go back to a lot the history, because Africa has long been an agricultural society, an agricultural continent. See, if you look at the West have gone through different stages. They were agricultural at one point, and then become industrial, and then post-industrial, for example, and you move on. Africa, in many ways, is still very much agricultural. It's not yet reached the stage of industrial or post-industrial eras, and because of that reason, you do not go far beyond that. Now, you might ask a deeper question: how come that is the case? Then we have to go back to the four major categories that I just mentioned: cultural reasons, social reasons, natural reasons, and mental reasons. But I don't think that's necessarily bad. Some other countries, for example, sometimes they specialize in agriculture. Look at Australia, for example. Some of the countries in Scandinavia, many of them, they export a lot of agricultural products. But many of them are not a manufacturing powerhouse, but they are still living okay. You see that? So you don't need to, in some other countries like UAE, they export oil, for example, mostly, but they are doing very well. So you don't need to be like a manufacturing powerhouse like China in order to be successful. That's why you ask this question: is economic system universal? I'm telling you, it's not. It depends on who you are. So let's say back to the question again: what are you? Who are you? What is your identity? Based on the four categories of reasons that I just mentioned to define what you want. What do you do? How do you survive? What do you export? What do you import? You see that? Back to the same question again.
Then I'll go back to my question. Why? Then you said all of this, but why is Africa still staggering behind in terms of economic development? Because we are now in the fourth industrial world, but Africa is still staggering behind. What seems to be the problem?
As I said before, there are 4 categories of explanation. You ask for explanation. There are 4 categories. Some of them are cultural explanation, some of them are social explanations, some of them are natural explanations, some of them are mental explanations. But I also want to question an assumption behind your question. You assume that that's bad. But I don't think that that's bad because you focus too much on the poverty, but you also do not focus on the wealth. But by conversely, we focus too much on the wealth in America, but we don't focus too much on the poverty. Now, by poverty and wealth, I don't mean exclusively money. Just in case you think that I'm talking about money. I'm not talking about money just by itself. I use that word in a much broader context. And that is important to understand wealth and poverty too. So in many other ways, Africa is much more developed than the West. Let me give you one example, just in case you think that this is shocking. This is not shocking at all, except that the Western mass media don't talk about it, and people here has been colonized so much. They look at the mirror from the Western standpoint. Let me give you one example. Hospitality is a good example. In African countries, many of them have the hospitality that you, for example, as a black, if you go to Japan or you go to Germany, you may not get. But a Japanese and a German, when they come to here, they will get some hospitality and humanity that you may not even conceive when you are there. Why? Because of racism. Now, that is important understanding of development too. Your mindset gets stuck in this kind of stereotype and racism. That is also a question of spirituality. It's also an important question of development too. You don't develop your spirit that well. You focus too much on talking about money and wealth, a car, a house, and all that. How about the other side? That's also important too, isn't it, for life? You see that.
Dr. Baofu, thank you for your time on Times of
Thank you
Program.
for inviting me.
Right. Mr. Mutleyo again, Professor Dr. Peter Baofu. Ke motho a tsamaileng haholo mme o ka rona ha ya Lesotho o tla ithuta hore na ha ya Lesotho le yona e sebetsa ditaba jwang, taba tsa dipolotiki, ditaba tsa tikoloho, ditaba tsa moruo ka kakaretso. Ha re mathe re fetela ka lefapheng la dipapadi.